Have you ever known someone who's disappeared? I think for most of us, the answer is probably no. But for those who are unlucky enough for that to be the case, were there signs before the person disappeared, or was it completely unexpected? And then second question, what do you think is worse? Is it worse for it to be sudden, or is it worse to almost see it coming before it happens? So in this video, we're going to go over 3 strange disappearances. The first had some strange signs, the second was alarmingly so, and the final had no signs at all, but is extremely disturbing anyway. As always, viewer discretion is strongly advised. Late in the afternoon of October 5th, 2018, a small television production crew was wrapping up a long day of filming in the mountains of central Idaho. The group had spent the day working near the abandoned Penman mine in the Oro Grande area, which is a rugged stretch of Idaho County known for its steep slopes, thick forests, and scattered remnants of old gold mining operations. As daylight began to fade, the crew started packing up equipment and preparing to head back to their motel. As the cameras were being shut down and gear was being gathered, there were conversations about dinner and the next day's schedule as the crew looked ahead to the rest of the project. Just as this was going on though, something strange happened. One of the youngest members of the crew, a 26-year-old production assistant named Terrence Woods, suddenly took off running. According to witnesses, the moment unfolded quickly and without much warning. Terrence removed the belt he was wearing, which held his radio, and dropped it on the ground before he started sprinting down the steep mountainside below the filming location. In response, crew members were stunned. At first, someone thought he might be simply rushing off to use the bathroom in the woods, but it soon became clear that something else was happening. Terrence was running faster than anyone expected. One crew member later said they had never seen someone run that quickly down such difficult terrain. Several of the crew members tried to chase after him and shouted for him to stop, but the slope was steep and the forest was dense with brush and trees. Within seconds, Terrence had already put a large distance between himself and the others. As some members of the crew scrambled down the hillside after him, they struggled to keep up. The fading daylight made the chase all the more difficult, causing the crew to almost lose sight of him. Then, just as suddenly as he started running, Terrence vanished into the wilderness below. The crew eventually reached the road at the bottom of the mountain, believing Terrence had headed in that direction, but when they arrived, there was no sign of him anywhere. In a matter of moments, Terrence, who had been standing beside them moments earlier, was gone. And in the years since that evening in Idaho's remote backcountry, no one has ever seen him again. To those who knew him, the idea that Terrence would suddenly vanish into the wilderness made little sense. He was known to be driven, thoughtful, kind, and deeply curious about the world around him. He grew up in Maryland, and when he was still young, his parents divorced, and his father, Terrence Sr., was awarded custody. The two developed a close bond that would remain through Terrence's life. From an early age as well, Terrence showed a strong interest in global events and storytelling. That curiosity eventually led him to pursue broadcast journalism at the University of Maryland, and according to those who studied alongside him, he was a standout student. Terrence graduated with a bachelor's degree in 2013 and then moved to London to continue his studies, and it was there that he earned a master's degree in international studies. He then began working in the TV and film industry, primarily as a freelance production assistant. Over the next 5 years, he built an impressive list of credits, and by 2018, Terrence had spent several years building his career in London's television industry. But that summer, he decided it was time for a change. In July of that year, he returned to the US and moved back in with his father in Maryland. The plan was to reset, reconnect with family, and then look for the next opportunity that might help move his career forward. As it turned out, not long after his return to Maryland, that opportunity appeared. Raw TV, a London-based production company Terrence had previously worked with, reached out to him with a job offer. The company was producing a spin-off of the popular Discovery series Gold Rush, titled Gold Rush: Dave Turn's Lost Mine. The show followed miners searching for gold in remote areas of the western US, and on September 30th, 2018, Terrence packed his bags and prepared to head west. Later that day, Terrence checked in with his father to say he had landed safely in Missoula, Montana. A few days later, on October 4th, Terrence sent a text to his father letting him know he had reached the hotel in Idaho where the crew would be staying while filming. Just before midnight that same night, he called home again and had a fairly straightforward, normal conversation with his father. To his family, it sounded like the beginning of just another job assignment, but by the following morning, something unexpected happened. Terrence sent his father a message saying he would be returning home on October 10th, far earlier than anyone expected. The weird thing was that the job had already begun, and Terrence didn't explain why he planned to leave. Later on, though, bits and pieces of information began to surface, hinting that something might not have been going smoothly. At some point, Terrence told members of the production company that he needed to return home because his mother was preparing to undergo surgery, but there was a problem with that story. His mother had already told him that the medical situation she was dealing with was not as serious as initially feared, so she didn't need surgery after all. When Terrence's father learned of this, he began to wonder if Terrence had used this explanation as a way to leave the job early. But if that was the case, the obvious question was why. There were also reports that Terrence had experienced an anxiety attack on the morning of October 5th, the same day he would ultimately disappear. According to some members of the production crew, the attack had been serious enough that they had to restrain him for a period of time. That claim would become one of the most controversial elements of the case. Terrence Sr. insisted that his son had never shown signs of anxiety attacks or serious mental health problems before, and friends who had worked with Terrence in the past echoed the same sentiment, and nothing about his past behavior suggested he was capable of suddenly losing control. Despite the alleged incident that morning, though, Terrence eventually regained his composure and the workday continued. As the afternoon wore on, though, Terrence reportedly began behaving in ways that some of the crew described as unusual. One crew member claimed that he tried to grab a drone out of the sky while it was still operating overhead. But even still, the filming continued as normal until the day wrapped up with Terrence disappearing into the woods. On October 6th, Terrence Sr. received a phone call from a producer informing him that Terrence had gone missing. As you might imagine, this call came out of nowhere. Less than 24 hours earlier, his son had been texting him about returning home soon. Now he was being told that Terrence had run into the mountains of Idaho and vanished. Authorities were then notified and police began organizing a search. One of the investigators assigned to the case was immediately struck by the terrain where Terrence disappeared. He described it as extremely difficult and incredibly steep, and scattered throughout the hills were abandoned mine shafts left behind from the region's gold mining days. Dogs were then brought in and were able to quickly pick up a trail and follow Terrence's scent down the same mountainside that witnesses said he had run down the night before. The dogs tracked the trail all the way to the road at the bottom of the slope, where it suddenly disappeared. For the next several days, the search continued in vain, despite the use of helicopters equipped with heat-sensing cameras. There was just no sign of Terrence anywhere. Finally, on October 11th, the official search was called off. In the time that followed since Terrence's disappearance, the investigator came to learn that there was apparently some tension between the young production assistant and the rest of the crew. Several of his coworkers described Terrence as weird during the shoot. On top of that, former employees came forward and described a toxic work environment that did not embrace new crew members. This information leads Terrence Sr. to still believe that Terrence met with foul play and that his disappearance didn't unfold the way the crew members described. In response to this, the lead investigator understands why a father of a missing person might feel this way, but has stated in several interviews that he found no evidence of foul play during his investigation. Raw TV has also maintained that Terrence was a valued and well-liked member of the production team. In public statements, the company has said that his disappearance deeply affected everyone involved in the shoot. Whether Terrence felt pressured by his fellow crew members to leave production, or if he suffered another anxiety attack just before disappearing, no one knows. Even today, no further evidence of where Terrence may have gone has ever surfaced. Jody Huisentruit was born in Long Prairie, Minnesota in the summer of 1968, and right from the beginning it was clear she was intelligent, with a big smile and an even bigger personality. In high school, Jody was an honor student, a cheerleader, homecoming queen, and an all-star member of the school's golf team. After high school, she attended university, then in 1991 she got a broadcasting job at KGAN in Cedar Rapids when she was just 22 or 23 years old. Over the following years, she worked at a number of small market stations in Iowa and Minnesota, and eventually she landed a coveted morning anchor job at KIMT TV in Mason City, Iowa. Jody jumped into the position headfirst and quickly made a name for herself. The aptly named Daybreak program aired at 6 a.m., which meant that Jody had to be at work by 3 a.m. at the latest. Luckily, her apartment was just a mile away from the station, but even so, she generally had to set her alarm for 2:30 a.m. The early morning news gig definitely wasn't for the faint of heart, but true to form, Jody never missed a program. It seemed like everything was going perfectly for Jody, and in many respects it was. But things took a dark turn in the fall of 1994 when she noticed something strange and a little alarming. On multiple occasions, she suspected she was being followed by someone driving a small white pickup truck. She regularly saw the pickup truck in her rearview mirror when she was driving to and from work and when she was out running errands and meeting friends. At first, she thought it might just be someone who lived nearby and had a schedule similar to hers, but it didn't take long to realize that she was actually being followed. After a few months of this, she reported it to police. They looked into it, but there wasn't much they could do since there was no evidence that a crime had been committed. It's also worth pointing out that Jodi's address and phone number were listed in the local phone book and that her schedule was extremely predictable. As a result of all of this, Jodi eventually became so concerned for her safety by the spring of 1995 that she enrolled in self-defense courses. And while she didn't have a gun, she bought a can of pepper spray and carried it with her everywhere she went. On Friday, June 9th, 1995, her friends threw a surprise 27th birthday party at a bar in Clear Lake, Iowa. One of the organizers was a longtime friend named John, who was 22 years older than she was. It's not really clear how they met, but their friendship apparently centered around fun outdoor activities like boating and water skiing. Jodi went out on John's boat with other friends on multiple occasions. She and John both claimed that they weren't romantically involved and that they had more of a father-daughter type relationship. However, some mutual friends thought that John loved Jodi, and deep down he hoped the relationship would eventually turn into something more. He even allegedly named his boat after her. But whatever the case, everyone had a great time at Jodi's surprise birthday party. And at one point, she met a 27-year-old man who just so happened to be at the bar that evening. It was clear that they were immediately attracted to one another. Before calling it a night, they exchanged phone numbers, and after that, they talked nearly every day. A week and a half later, on or about June 22nd, they met at his place for their first date. According to the man, they spent the evening on his back porch, talking, sipping drinks, and looking out over the lake behind the complex. Jodi then went back to her place later that night. A few days later, on Monday, June 26, she played a charity golf tournament at the Mason City Country Club. That day, though, something was bothering her. During the event, she told a few friends that she'd be getting annoying and offensive phone calls from an anonymous caller. It's unclear who the caller was or what he said, but Jodi told her friends that she was going to change her phone number the following day. Later that evening, after the tournament, she swung by John's apartment to watch a video he took at her 27th birthday party a few weeks before. Jodi didn't stay long though because she had work the following morning. We don't know what time she got home or what time she fell asleep, but for some reason she had a hard time getting up when her alarm went off the following morning. A producer called her at 4 a.m. to check on her and make sure she was coming in. Jodi then answered the phone, said she overslept, and apologized profusely and told her she'd be there in a few minutes. And again, her apartment was only about a mile away. The producer then called again at 5 a.m. when Jodi still wasn't there, but this time nobody answered the phone. Jodi still hadn't shown up by 6 a.m. when the producer stepped in to guest host the morning broadcast, and she still wasn't there more than an hour later when a staffer called the police to request a welfare check. An officer arrived at her apartment a few minutes later at 7:16 a.m. Nobody answered when he identified himself loudly and knocked on her apartment door. The manager eventually showed up with a key and let him into Jodi's apartment. Once inside, he found no sign of a break-in or struggle. Jodi's bed was unmade, and the only thing even moderately out of the ordinary was her curling iron, which was still plugged in. The scene in the parking lot, though, was far more disturbing. The officer found earrings, a blow dryer, a can of hairspray, one red high-heeled shoe, and Jodi's bent car key strewn around the parking lot. And worse yet, he saw marks indicating that something heavy had been dragged through the lot away from Jodi's car. At that point, it looked like she was attacked from behind and abducted while walking from her apartment to her car. Investigators informed Jodi's family and coworkers about her disappearance shortly after the welfare check. At the station, Jodi's friend, who anchored the evening program, began preparing a script to read on air that night to let viewers know what happened, and to inform them that barring a miracle, they probably wouldn't see her for the foreseeable future. As her family struggled to come to grips with her disappearance, the Mason City Police requested assistance from the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation and the FBI. Local, state, and federal investigators then got things started by interviewing Jodi's friends, family members, coworkers, and neighbors. Interestingly, a few neighbors claimed to have seen a white Ford van idling in the parking lot with its lights on early that morning. Unfortunately, nobody got the license plate number, and the apartment complex didn't have any security cameras. Crime scene technicians also found a partial palm print on Jodi's car, but other than that, they found no other significant clues about what happened that morning. So next, investigators talked to John, since he and Jodi watched the video of her birthday party together the night before she went missing. He would say that he cared about Jodi deeply, that they weren't romantically involved, that he already had a girlfriend his own age, and that he had absolutely nothing to do with her disappearance. A number of entries in Jodi's personal journal confirmed that she viewed him strictly as a friend, mentor, and activity buddy. But again, some of their mutual friends thought his true feelings ran far deeper. Investigators also questioned the 27-year-old man she met at her birthday party. He said that he and Jody were immediately attracted to one another, that they shared a strong bond, and that they were both looking forward to seeing where their relationship took them. However, and I know this is frustrating, police ultimately found no evidence linking him or anyone else to Jody's disappearance. In the years that followed, investigators pursued countless leads. Detectives conducted hundreds of interviews, searched properties across multiple states, and repeatedly revisited the physical evidence collected from the crime scene. Much of that attention centered around Jody's friend John. Investigators interviewed him numerous times, obtained search warrants, and in 1999 secretly placed a GPS tracking device on his vehicle in the hope that he might lead them to a crime scene or burial site. Years later, a federal grand jury even subpoenaed John for DNA samples, fingerprints, and palm prints. And investigators again monitored his movements as he traveled across several states. Despite decades of scrutiny, though, no physical evidence ever linked John or any other suspect to Jody's disappearance. Several other persons of interest were investigated, some were cleared, and others died before questions could ever fully be answered. And despite years of work, no breakthrough has ever come. John, who remained a primary person of interest for decades, relocated to Arizona in 2012 and maintained his innocence until his death in December of 2024 at the age of 78. The DNA and palm prints he provided were never linked to evidence from the crime scene, and nearly 30 years after Jody disappeared, the case remains unsolved. On June 27, 2025, her friend and former colleague reread the same script he had prepared for the evening news broadcast less than 24 hours after she vanished. It again informed viewers that the smiling anchor they watched each morning was missing. So, what we know is that on the only morning Jody was ever late for work, she seems to have walked to her car only for all of her fears to be justified. After that, she was never seen again, and 30 years later, what happened in those last few moments remains unknown. Rebecca Clino passed away on Valentine's Day in 2011 after a long fight with skin cancer. According to her obituary, she was preceded in death by a number of family members, including her ex-husband Bob and their son Branson, who disappeared under bizarre circumstances a decade before. Before Rebecca died, she bought 2 adjacent plots, one for herself and the other for Branson, in the event that his body was ever found. Tragically, as of early 2026, the plot next to Rebecca's is still vacant. Branson Perry was born on February 24, 1981, in the small town of Skidmore, Missouri, about 100 miles north of Kansas City. Branson was his parents' only child, and as such, they were understandably protective. As he grew up, he became an avid outdoorsman, a weightlifter, and earned a black belt in Korean Hapkido. As a young man, Branson was about 5 feet 9 inches tall and 155 pounds, and despite his training, Branson wasn't much of a fighter. He was actually described as a likable and easygoing guy who generally got along with everybody. He graduated from high school in 1999, and at about the same time, his parents Bob and Rebecca divorced. After that, his mother moved to a small town a few miles away, but Branson stayed with his father at the family home in Skidmore. After high school, he worked for a roofing company and later for a mobile petting zoo. In many respects, he was just like millions of other young men in rural towns across America. He worked, hung out with his friends, tried to stay out of trouble, and spent a lot of time hunting, fishing, and lifting weights. His more or less completely normal life made what happened in 2001 all the more strange. In April of that year, 20-year-old Branson was at home alone while his father was in the hospital having surgery, and before long, the otherwise neat and tidy house got pretty messy. Since Branson expected his father to be back on the 13th, he called his longtime friend Jenna and asked if she'd come over to help him clean it up on Wednesday, April 11th. Jenna agreed and arrived early that afternoon. When she got there, 2 men were replacing the alternator on Branson's father's car in the driveway. Branson and Jenna had been cleaning for a little over an hour when at approximately 3 p.m. he told her he was going to take the jumper cables the men in the driveway had used and put them in the shed beside the house. But first, he hurriedly took something out of one of the kitchen cabinets. Jenna asked him what it was, but he wouldn't tell her. Next, Branson walked outside, had a brief conversation with the men in the driveway, grabbed the jumper cables, and walked around the side of the house toward the shed. At the time, he was wearing black boots, blue jeans, and a white sweatshirt. Jenna assumed the trip to the shed and back would take less than a minute, but Branson just never came back. After a while, she got tired of waiting and figured he spaced out and had gone off to meet other friends, so she left his home sometime before 3:30, and the men working on the car left shortly thereafter. Branson's grandmother stopped by the house to check on him late the following morning. She knocked and called her grandson's name multiple times, but nobody came to the door. She called the house and Branson's cell phone multiple times over the next few days, but he never answered her calls. Meanwhile, due to unforeseen complications, Branson's father, Bob, stayed in the hospital a few days longer than expected. On Sunday, April 15th, Branson's grandmother told Bob that his son was gone. At that point, Bob also confirmed that he hadn't seen or heard from Branson since Tuesday, April 10th. They then called Branson's mother, Rebecca, to see if she had any idea where he was, but she said she hadn't talked to him in nearly a week. So with that, they called the county sheriff's office and reported him missing on Monday, April 16th. Bob initially thought that Branson might have hitchhiked to Kansas City. This made sense because Branson had friends in Kansas City and he couldn't drive himself because his van wasn't working at the time. However, Bob and the detectives ruled this out when a search of his room revealed that he hadn't taken his wallet, phone, and bank cards. Early on, investigators also spent a lot of time talking to Jenna since she was the last person to see Branson. She told them they were cleaning the house and that he went outside and talked with the men in the driveway before taking the jumper cables to the shed. The only strange part about this, other than his disappearance, was that investigators didn't find the jumper cables in the shed. The search organized by the sheriff's office covered a huge area about 15 miles around the family home. And all told, the search lasted for an entire week and included farms, forests, commercial and residential areas, as well as abandoned buildings and dozens of old oil and gas wells. But in the end, their efforts were fruitless. At that point, it looked like Brandon just vanished into thin air. He walked to the shed and somehow completely disappeared in a 1-minute time span. This wasn't the end of the weirdness, though. It's unclear who found them, but the jumper cables that allegedly weren't there during the initial search miraculously appeared in the shed 2 weeks later. This begged the question, could the investigators possibly have missed them the first time around, or did someone sneak into the yard and put them there after Branson disappeared? And if so, who and why would someone do this? Whatever the case, Jenna then made a number of revelations under additional questioning. First, she admitted that they were smoking that day, and second, that they were using methamphetamines. She also said that word around town was that Branson owed a local dealer a fair amount of money. This led investigators on a new course during which they questioned a number of Branson's contacts and acquaintances. Some were even given polygraph tests. As far as what's been released though, everyone passed, and so the authorities were never able to substantiate the drug debt theory. Meanwhile, the investigation continued behind the scenes over the following months and years. By early 2003, Branson's family and friends had largely resigned themselves to the fact that he'd never be found and that his mysterious disappearance would never be solved. Then in mid-April of 2003, the police arrested a 59-year-old Presbyterian minister and Boy Scout leader named Jack Wayne Rogers, and he is by far the most disturbing potential connection to the case. One of the charges against him was first-degree assault, but as bad as that was, they also charged him with performing illegal surgeries in which he allegedly removed men's genitals in makeshift operating rooms without their consent. Investigators also found CP while searching his home, and later they discovered shocking posts he made on online message boards. In one of these posts, he claimed to have eaten the parts he removed from the men. In another, he described assaulting, torturing, murdering, and mutilating a young blonde male hitchhiker somewhere in Missouri and burying the body in a remote part of the Ozark Mountains. Since the description matched Branson, the investigators working the case decided to confront Jack and ask if it was him. As you might have guessed though, he claimed he never met Branson and that his posts were all entirely made up. Investigators have mentioned that they don't know if he was being truthful or not, but lean toward him likely being deceitful. What makes this more disturbing is that during a subsequent search of his home, they found a turtle claw necklace that looked almost exactly like one Branson was known to have worn. Now obviously, it could have been a coincidence that Jack had a necklace like Branson's and that he just so happened to make up a horrific story about a young man who looked a lot like him, but it's certainly strange to say the least. Confusing things further is that the debt theory is often seen as equally likely. A well-known den in Skidmore burned down shortly after the disappearance, and investigators explored the theory that Branson may have been murdered there and the place was burned down to destroy the evidence. Another possibility explored was that he overdosed at the house while partying with friends. Branson had a potentially fatal heart condition known as tachycardia that can be exacerbated by using stimulants. If that's what happened, the people he was with might have panicked and disposed of the body to prevent themselves from getting wrapped up in an investigation. Unfortunately, as of today, none of these theories have ever been substantiated. Bob Perry passed away in March of 2004, never knowing what happened to his son. The following month, Jack Wayne Rogers was convicted and sentenced to more than 3 decades in prison for several different charges. Branson's mother attended his sentencing and begged him to confess and to reveal where her son was buried, but Jack maintained that he had nothing to do with Branson's disappearance. And interestingly, in a statement after the sentencing, Rebecca said she believed him. After that, the case went cold for a number of years. In 2007 and 2009, the police got a number of tips about potential burial sites in Skidmore. The tipsters apparently never told the authorities how Branson died, but they did say that his body was dug up, moved, and reburied a number of times to throw police off the trail. Neither of these searches yielded any results, however. Branson's mother offered a $20,000 reward for information leading to his body in 2010, but tragically, she died the following year. A decade later, in the summer of 2022, the county sheriff announced that a new suspect had been identified. After nearly 2 decades, this was huge news, but as far as we know, the suspect was never identified or arrested. Most recently, in 2024, another anonymous tip led to a burial site excavation on a property about 6 miles north of Branson's home in Skidmore. That operation included officers and agents from local law enforcement, the Missouri State Highway Patrol, and the FBI. They spent several days excavating the site and determined the earth had been recently disturbed. This suggested that something may have been buried there and moved, but like in 2007 and 2009, nothing was found. With so many dead-end tips, some law enforcement officials began to suspect that they were intentionally being led on to frustrate them and throw them off the real trail. As of 2026, the investigation is still active and ongoing, and the county sheriff's office still follows up on all new tips and leads. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching, and a special thanks to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon or as a channel member. If you're interested, we offer early access videos that are released roughly a week before the regular YouTube uploads. Also, if you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it using the form found in the description. Anyways, thanks again, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.